should give us a little. And so it's now recording, and I am going to throw over to Ben Dooster to introduce you and just read your bio.
All right. Welcome, everyone. This is our 21st SHRED seminar. And I'm really stoked to introduce Dr. Benjamin Büscher today. Ben will talk about a pedagogical aspect of skateboarding. We had a great session or panel where Ben was actually a great host, where different perspectives were sort of illuminated on skateboarding and exploring the city. If you are interested in that, you can check that out on our YouTube channel if you want to see more of Ben and all the other great panelists. But yeah, I have the honor to introduce Ben a little bit. So as I understand, Ben will talk about his PhD research or project today. So at the moment, he is a research associate at the Institute of Sport and Physical Education at the University of Osnabrück, which is great to hear because, as far as I remember, Osnabrück is one of the statistically happiest cities in Germany. So it's a great place to be. I hope that it's going to be a great and inspiring stay there. So Ben is working at the Department of Sport and Society, and he is associated also with the Center for School Sports Research at the University of Dortmund, which is in the Ruhr-Basing area in Western Germany, and also the German Network of Skate and Research. His research focuses on action sport, cultures, physical education, education for sustainable development, ethnography, practice theory, and skateboarding. He is the main publisher of the anthology Skate and Research, which was, as far as I remember, published with the publisher Transcript, which is a great publishing house because they make available a lot of their works open access. So I encourage you to check out their website. There's a lot to explore there. And Ben is also about to publish his book on skateboarding and pedagogical stagings. Ben also provided his email address. Ben, are you okay with me with sharing your email address also in the chat?
Absolutely.
Cool. Then I will pop that in the chat, and I'll also pop in all the links for our our social media or WordPress website. We are planning a couple more sessions for this year, and we have a bunch already uploaded on our YouTube channel. So yeah, feel free to peruse those. And at the moment, there's a couple things still in the works. There's a bit of technical difficulty at the moment with the YouTube channel, but I'm working on it. And I would say within the next month or two, those of you who want to maybe check back on the recording. So we are recording the session and we're uploading the video to YouTube within a month or maybe 1.5 months. You should be able to review the session as well. So without further ado, take it over, Ben, and I pop your email address in the chat.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben, and also Indy, for having me here and for this very warm introduction. I'm gonna introduce today to you my finalized PhD project that's called Skateboarding in Pedagogical Staging. And the subtitle is Ethnography of a Cultural Transformation, which, even though the book has been handed into Transcript, publisher, can still be discussed, of course. So let me just check whether the presentation works. That looks great. So yeah, what the hell is going on here? Like this ethnographical basic question I asked myself with regard to two aspects when I entered this particular learning and teaching environment in the Dortmund indoor skate park. First of all, this setting kind of irritated my idea of informal skateboarding. I have been skateboarding for 20 years now, And this was something that in many respects stood in contrast to this idea of skateboarding. I'm going to specify this further on. And on the other hand, it also didn't really fit into the perceptions of pedagogical stagings I acquired during my studies at TU Dortmund University to become a teacher. So this is just the introduction, and my presentation today has a quite classical agenda. So I'm going to start off with my theoretical framework on what I understand are pedagogical stagings in connection to skateboarding. Then I'm going to justify some central methodological and methodic decisions and my research designs. I'm going to highlight three main categories of my results just as an overview today, and we'll put a focus on the methodological reflection and also the outlook with regard to skateboarding culture and further sports pedagogical research. So let's dive right in. And a question I always need to justify in my community is why skateboarding? Why this particular movement culture? And one justification is that it's a very popular, very prominent, very visible youth and subculture within sports. So we have a broad field of skateboard studies that documents and also justifies why skateboarding works very well to illustrate particular aspects of sports, of informal sports, such as the movement culture of rolling sports or the different spaces of street skateboarding or skate parks, and also a particular social group constellation within informal sports, as well as stylistic features that are brought forward and presented in the movement culture. However, this, so to say, state of the art has undergone quite some irritations due to the fact that skateboarding has reached a state of maturity and diffusion. This is a translation from some Swiss scholars, Lamprecht and Stamm, and that can be further described by the three, I call them transformation processes of differentiation. So skateboarding no longer remains a male dominated, male oriented movement activity, but has different new groups, not only adolescents, but also younger kids and adults skate, but also many, hopefully, flinter persons that keep growing. That's a growing community. And there's also a pluralization of skateboarding with regard to its content. So we have the core scene that holds on to a more subcultural idea of skateboarding, but we also have new forms such as the competitive skateboarding in the context of the Olympic Games, but also in educational settings such as training facilities. Some teachers integrate skateboarding into physical education in institutionalized schools, and we have those learning environments that are brought forward by CEOs, by non-governmental organization, NGOs, that is, and also by the scene itself, so by scene members who are pedagogically trained. So in this, or just as a quick summary, skateboarding remains between a state of resilience that holds on to its core values, but also undergoes, also my translation from Felten-Schaeffer, a self-transformation program. So a constant self-transformation from within the subculture itself. That set me on the road from my sports pedagogical perspective, and I have selected today three major works that touch upon pedagogical topics such as learning. First of all, we look into Robert Petroni's study Dropping In, also an ethnography that examines the subcultural knowledge, specific competences, and also the learning in skate parks. And genuinely, the learning modality here is informal, so the the participants, they practice on their own, they observe actively, they ask strategic questions, but there's no real formal tutors or teachers. Content can also be acquired via tutorials or via certain magazines or books, but not in a formal way. And in another work, the work by Veit Kilbert and Jürgen Schwier, it's an anthology. We have several chapters in this book that focus on the sportification of skateboarding. So the informal subculture is continuously formalized and institutionalized, not just in the Olympic Games, but also in pedagogical productions, as Bindel and Pick describe it on the basis of school sports research. We have also done some extensive studies on how and in which way skateboarding should or could be integrated into school. It's a very ambivalent field, but it shows that the transformation is also taking place in pedagogical fields. And a particular form of pedagogical stagings is described by the Moving Borders studies from 2018. This centers around the Bay Area in San Francisco, where the group of 4 researchers have examined 4 different skate parks. And here they have found very different pedagogical settings, such as clinics, lessons, academies, sleepover camps, even birthday parties can be described as a learning and teaching environments. And they have explicit objectives such as social inclusions, and the diversification of the subculture itself. And the source of knowledge, or the data form here, were interviews conducted with different skate coaches who give their very subjective point of view with regard to this development. So we have different forms of pedagogical stagings that lead me to my research questions. So this is kind of the situation, the theoretical and heuristic situation I'm building my study on. These are 3 selected studies. There are some German studies who also touch upon pedagogical fields, but here the field stays remain onto one singular visit, so only just a peeping into this kind of skateboarding, these forms of skateboarding based on broader study focuses. So as I said, my first question was, what the hell is going on here? So why do these settings exist? How do they work? What happens there? And maybe what's the difference to other forms of skateboarding? But this is also my interpretation. And in the course of my study, and while being in such fields, I could carve out 2 different research questions. One early one focuses on the organizational framework. So how are these learning and teaching programs structured? What's the social structure? Who goes there? What kind of people go there? And how does it all together in one skate park? And the third question later on focused on the learning practices in the field, like specific learning practices and modalities, and how these were staged by the teachers or by the skate coaches. All right, so how did I research it? First of all, I have to say I had like a longer period of orientation. In total, I visited 11 skateboarding learning programs in total, mostly in Germany, but also in the US, in California, in Australia, and in South Africa. And to dive deeper into these fields, I selected the indoor skate park of Dortmund. That was also, of course, a biographical and very pragmatic decision to be able to go there on a regular basis. And my time frame in the end was a 1-week ethnography. So I went to the Dortmund Indoor Skate Park once a week. I conducted 45 field trips in total. And as you might see when you look at the end of my study, that my ethnography came to a rather abrupt ending due to the COVID outbreak and the lockdown, and the setting was for many months no longer existent. I did go back afterwards, but not in the position of a field researcher. Just quickly to sketch out the group. So I had, in the whole range of 1 year, I had 70 participants in total, age 5 to 53. And also in total, 6 so-called peer teamers. That's a wording from the field. So these teamers can also be described as skate coaches or skate teachers. 1 girl and 5 guys. Okay, like on average, we had about 20 participants in the field and at least 2 teamers per session. And yeah, this is kind of the sketch. I also briefly want to justify some methodological decisions. I have divided my methodological decisions into 4 parts, or I always talk about pieces of the pizza. And the first piece concerns my research design. As I said, I decided to conduct an ethnography, so describe the field, don't intervene as like a teacher myself, or don't try to change the field, but describe what I found there. And I had to define the field. I had to moderate some access with the help of particular scene members who helped me to join in as a gatekeeper, immerse in the field, and then in the end, of course, depart again. For me, it was very important to gain an internal perspective of the field itself, but also its actors, and to engage participatory. So that means that I joined in the skateboarding there, also the learning processes and teaching practices, but also join in the whole organizational structure. So 2 references are the pedagogical ethnography that kind of reflects on my pedagogical perspective, and also the sports ethnography that reflects on my own movements in the field, the requirements in order to skate there. And yeah, this is on the first slice of pizza. And the next one concerns the data collection. I had 3 data sources. First, of course, my participant observation created 300 pages of field notes, of field protocols. I transformed the field notes into protocols and then selected essays, which you will see later on for illustration of certain anchoring examples. I also conducted field interviews in the course of my study, mostly later on because we had to build up some trust and some familiarity. I could record some group discussions, but also led active interviews and conversations that led up to 200 pages of transcripts of interviews. And I collected heaps of documents from the field, starting with the websites, but also there were flyers, there were articles about this learning environment, and also other like neighboring offers from the skate parks, forms to register, to inform the parents, and so on and so forth. And from this whole bunch of data, I had to find a strategy to analyze it. So I used the grounded theory according to Strauss and Corbing. That is mainly the 3 steps of coding, but in an iterative and cyclical circle in exchange with data collection and analysis. So after each field stay, I coded my protocols and transcript, and then went back to the field in order to narrow down my categories, which you will later on get to know. Okay, and just briefly, my analytical perspective. This is connected to the grounded theory. So on the second level of axis categorization, I framed what I observed there as practices. So what can be observed, what is done in the field, which practices constitute the field in the social interaction. But I figured out that I also needed an additional cultural perspective that draws more on the framework of skateboarding. So how this reference culture of skateboarding is connected to the actual field practices that I observed in the field. These were not always similar to each other and are continuously compared. Okay, now to my results, and I have three main categories that are kind of organized as a funnel. So they follow the ethnographic journey into the field. First, I did a lot of research on the space and the group found there. Within these two factors, there is an organizational structure that kind of realizes the field. So here we have the second research question, and then within the organizational structure, we have practices of teaching and learning. As you can see, the funnel is open at the bottom, so we'll see later on what drops out in the end. Okay, we dive into the first category, space and group, divided as the two factors. So I start with the spatial analysis of the Dortmund Indoor Skate Park. That is defined by external factors such as setting around the skate parks, other activities in the skate park, but not this particular learning program, but also references to school sports, to other sports clubs that are shaping this particular field. And then there's the internal life world. So the field within first the skate park, then this particular setting in the skate park with a particular spatial structure. There's different areas, there's elements that can be moved around, there's materials that are used for the particular teaching purposes and the practicing of skateboarding, safety reasons. This is a different skate park I found there than the one I usually skated in winters in Dortmund. There's a particular practices of managing this space. So when there's a group of 20 beginners, the space can be quite limited. So there's spatial distribution among the participants, but also by the teamers. There's allocations with regard to needs and requirements, and also the level of skateboarding. It's very crucial with regards to which ramps are allowed to be skated or which aren't. And there's also some kind of defense when participants find that space is or an obstacle in the skate park is particularly useful, they also defend it. They also kind of try to displace other participants, or you need to be invited into their spaces. And this is an experience I also made as an ethnographer, to slowly approach the participants via a shared obstacle. There's also non-sportive practices who bind the group, such as taking a break together, climbing on the ramps, sliding them down, and And then that leads me to the second part of this social space. That's the group itself. That is divided into those who occasionally visit in the outer circles and the primary group of participants and teamers in the inner circle. Focusing on the teamers, they have a very distinct role profile. They can be described as trainers or teachers. Some see them as just older skaters who are here with us. Some even consider them as friends. So it's very ambivalent also among the participants how the teamers are perceived there. With regard to the participants, I figured that some background factors or dimensions of heterogeneity are more or less equalized in the skateboarding. One example would be the ethnic backgrounds. We had many different ethnic backgrounds, but they were never like explicitly addressed, or even in the interactions, they never really played a role. But that is, of course, just my ethnographic subjective perception of what I could see. What I could identify is binary gender relations, meaning that there is differences between boys and girls. No third or other genders have revealed themselves to me. And another group would be that there is a dominance of children. So the main group is children. They are very loud, they are very present, and they are able to articulate what they expect from this particular learning program in skateboarding. So they also contribute to the shaping of the field. Further dimensions of heterogeneity would be the level of skateboarding or the duration, how long they have been there, what they're able to refer to, the knowledge of the field. And this is also an explanation for the ongoing attachment and continuity of the field. So they don't just visit occasionally, but most of them really stay for years. They find there their own social space that is connected to the particular movement culture, but it's also connected to the particular group and friends and relationships they form there. All right, let's move on to the second main category, that would be the organization. So I think I also already sketched that the teamers and also the participants are organizational bodies of the field, both participate, both organize this field. There are recurring progressions, such as it starts with a ritual of sitting together, of saying hello. Then there's certain social forms that reoccur, for example, warming up at the whole group and then dividing into smaller groups. There's certain organizational forms, such as practicing in a circle of skateboards or forming a line in order to wait for the starting point to approach a ramp. There's practices of regulation. We have explicit rules that are there on the poster, but also there's like more informal rituals and negotiations of such rules and such organizational structures. 2 points of reference are, on the one hand, safety, which is very important for the teamers, but also parents and other actors, and also the organizers of the skate park. And on the other hand, we have authenticity that is sometimes in contradiction to all these safety forms and frameworks, and it's often discussed. In the argumentation, there's also other sports institutions, such as schools, as can be here, which is like a negative counter example to the field. And it's often said, we don't just want to stretch or play, but we want to do the actual thing. We want to skate, and we want to learn how to skate here, and don't just copy what we have in school anyways. The result is some kind of a hybrid of different reference cultures or reference institutions, which I call, so we have the formal guidelines and the informal space to, or the scope to discuss and describe the field in itself. And I called it semi-formal, but this is just an offer between the two poles, and I'm sure there will be other formulations that grasp more the core of this particular skateboarding field. Okay, now to the main purpose of why participants and also teamers attend this field, why they go there and what they expect from it. And this would be, of course, to learn skateboarding, but also if you teach skateboarding, certain cultural content, such as an ollie or a drop-in, like a particular technique, but also the slang terms from skateboarding language and some stylistic features with regard to clothing or graffiti are addressed in the field. The teaching itself follows a systematization of holistic movement tasks, but also explicit learning objectives that are checked on a regular basis, and sometimes they are recalibrated, sometimes they are reached, but it's very important for the field to articulate individual learning objectives that are then pursued. There's also I also framed it as some kind of service. So the teamers also guide the participants through care, through the support, especially when there's like injuries or when there's a lot of slams. And I have observed, of course, tears and also some increased attention from the teamers with regard to individuals who need more support. Others are more autonomous. But yeah, this issue of dependence of teachers, especially for younger children and beginners, have become quite visible in the field. So we also, again, find ourselves within two poles. One would be the binding cultural norms, such as the language, the tricks, etc., the ramps itself, and expedient workarounds in order to kind of break skateboarding down to a form that is actually manageable for beginners, and don't just practice the kickflip in the beginning, but first maybe just little hand flips or finger flips or even just smaller movements just to get used to the boards. These particular movement practices gain a lot of field eminent recognition and also designations from the teamers, but also the participants. But there's also situations such as the anchoring example here in the bottom, where a teamer corrects a participant and he says, "That's not skateboarding what you're doing there. Please, you should practice real tricks." So they also overform the skateboarding of the participants at times. And the idea behind it, and my category I suggest, is the empowerment for informal skateboarding. So this is a major general objective to enable the participants to also skate outside of this particular learning program. And it's always stressed in every session. All right, now to the learning. So we switch a bit the perspective from the teamers to the participants, but make no mistake, of course, learning is also an interactive process between teamers and learners. In theory, we have many different competencies. We can look at learning content, modalities, and practices. The later one is an approach I chose, so I cannot show whether stuff is really learned because also my time perspective was very limited. It's only 3 hours once a week and only over a year. So I focus on how the participants learn there. And we can divide the content of learning between the movements and also cultural content from the reference culture of skateboarding. Particular practices are the exploration in the skate park. They skate around, they explore the ramps, but they also focus on particular techniques and then try and error until they landed or they never landed and they find alternatives in the process. Right. Then there's also a consolidation practice. When they have acquired a particular technique or landed it once or twice, they keep applying it. They transfer it onto different ramps and they present it also in media forms. And yeah, they want to present it also in front of the group. That is very important, that once you have some new techniques, they want to share it. And one particular practice I figured, and I see that at least in this extent, in contrast to informal skateboarding, is that there is a very open, very explicit culture of wanting to help and accepting help from others. This is, of course, again, connected to the organizational and the social framework I've sketched out, But this leads me to the suggestion that we have a particular practice, we have a particular culture of learning and teaching in this field that can be compared to other settings of skateboardings. Right, so let's sum up my main results. Of course, this is just a general overview. Here we again have the main categories, but as you might have figured, these always have to be set in context of skateboarding in a broader scale and the specific nature of this learning and teaching program. And this leads me to my core category in the language of Corbin and Strauss, grounded theory. That would be the cultural transformation and pedagogical staging. This is kind of the drop that drops out at the end of the funnel. It's my narrative and also my argumentative structure. It starts very general on the spatial and social level, narrows down to the organizational structure and the teaching of learning. They are all connected via this idea of cultural transformation. This category is not solely driven from the field, but also, of course, in connection to theoretical reframings, which I have pointed out. And it needs to be reflected on and also needs to be relativized. First of all, when we look into transformation theories, we certainly have to stress that this is a partial cultural transformation, and not just in any pedagogical staging, but a sports pedagogical staging, or even stagings, if we see this different practices and situations as different stagings within one bigger framework. Chemists calls this pedagogical practice as collective critical transformative praxis. That means that the pedagogical interaction brings forth a critical changing perspective also onto skateboarding. And with the words of Fischer-Lichte, this is a translation from me. It's a transfiguration of the ordinary. So the ordinary would be the skateboarding we all know. This skate of the art or state of the art I've sketched out in the beginning of my presentation, and is transfigured in the particular setting. And this process or this practice of transformation, I wanted to make visible on an empirical level, on a very micro level of the practice itself. But of course, it needs to be put into a bigger framework in order to check whether it really works as a core category, also on a methodological level, and in how far it can be transferred to other settings that can be other learning environments in skateboarding, but also other institutions that offer skateboarding. This photo here is from a German school, and also comparable fields, other movement cultures that are closer or further away from skateboarding, but maybe have similar organizational structures. Limitations are obvious. As I stated earlier, my departure from the field was very abrupt, very sudden because of COVID and because the field simply was no longer there anymore, and therefore I cannot claim a theoretical saturation from the data as grounded theory hardliners such as Glaser would suggest would be necessary. So my theoretical or my categories I have presented, they have grown over the years, also in exchange with colleagues on conferences, in smaller papers they have been discussed. And yeah, so this would be certainly a limitation to the grounded theory perspective. Another more practical, more with regard to the participation in the field, I would say we need to discuss in how far participant knowledge is necessary to join into such a specific culturally coded learning environment, and also which skateboarding skills are necessary to participate there. This can also be discussed in connection to other research field, ethnographic fields of skateboarding. In my field, there has been a very strong reactivity of the field. That means the participants addressed me sometimes as a teacher, sometimes as someone who's just different, who's older than them, who can already skate and who kind of appears like an alien there. And I also had to subjectivize my own position. So that means reflect upon which role do I want to take here in the field? Which perspective is the most helpful for me now in this field interaction? And this also changed at certain points. So sometimes I did accept the teacher position for a brief moment, or the teamer position even. And sometimes I acted as a participant in order to follow up the whole learning process. Limitations or things that can be also extended with regard to this study design would be the duration in the field. Maybe then some designs will allow to also reconstruct certain progressions in learning, which I do not claim, and also follow up on how the participants in the field, because I only visited them in the actual pedagogical staging, how they identify with the scene of skateboarding and the culture in the long run. So this would be follow-up questionnaires or maybe even interviews like 10 years later where you ask them which parts do you still skate, which parts of skateboarding have you taken from the field and which have you built out, or yeah, educated yourself. On the organizational structure, there is, of course, different forms of such learning and teaching environments. I worked on a case study here, but there's different structures, different forms of governance. Some are governed by NGOs, some are governed by a local scene, some are governed by schools or even sports club. That the dissemination of such pedagogical stagings is growing. There's a first like hint to it with regard to the Good Push study that structures social settings of skateboarding. And we also, of course, I didn't really quantitatively evaluate these participation figures, like how the participation also varied between certain states. This is, of course, a methodological perspective that can be pursued on a quantitative level. Right, now to my outlook. So how do we connect this particular field with the rest of skateboarding? Or how does skateboarding maybe even, or skateboard studies maybe even react to such a particular field? From my perspective, I experienced a growing recognition of such fields. When I started it in 2019, this was very exotic, very new to me. Then I started traveling and saw that in other parts in the world, it's quite normal to teach skateboarding in such clinics or in such skate trainings. And also I witnessed a growing recognition in academia that skateboarding is not just this homogeneous informal scene, but there is different setting of teaching and educational settings in skateboarding. There's a growing diversification of the spaces. This can be an indoor skate park or even public skate parks or street sports. It's different formats such as weekly lessons or even like one-time events to bring together particular groups. We have different objectives and different sizes as well. Like a skate school or a skate club can also be just someone who puts up a sign in front of their front door, puts up a skateboard, and then waits for people who arrive to skate there with them. Or even very professionalized indoor skate parks who make a lot of money out of these commercialized offers. Okay. From a sociological point of view, those settings are located in the periphery of youth scene. Like the main research focus still focuses on the informal skate scene. And this skate scene also articulates some kind of criticism with regard to these settings. They say that they go They are institutionalizations, domestications of the original subcultural skateboardings. They argue that the pedagogical influence is quite limited here, and that the transfer to informal skateboarding is kind of undermined by the teamers or by the pedagogical persons. And from my pedagogical point of view, I suggest that these settings can be, of course, be regarded as a negative counter world to skateboarding. It can be a dual world when skateboarding culture is like one-to-one presented in the field, but it's also an inner world. It's an own world in itself with its own logics. I hope I have shown this today. And this particular world has many connections to other fields of sport, to other settings, other subcultures, and other structures of sports. I will not go into detail because my time is up, but I thank you very much for your attention. These are my references and figures, and if you want to follow up on my research activity, please follow me on Instagram. Here you have my research on ResearchGate. We have a newsletter here from Dortmund that distributes skateboarding academia. One book is already out that was introduced in the beginning, and the study I've presented today will be published during the year. Thank you so much.
Yay. Thank you, Ben. That was amazing.
I
Yeah.
hope I'm in time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Way better than the German trains. I actually have a question to kick off question time, if that's all right.
Yes.
Because you said this great sentence about the pandemic where the field disappeared. And I think that is very interesting because I'm curious if you had any insights on whether some of the members or maybe some of the teachers even were like catching up like somewhere, like a Aldi parking lot or somewhere to just go skate so that this whole like that the social network was still there, but it was the pandemic sort of shifted it into this like informal skate world because in I was in Australia at the time and there were the lockdowns were pretty harsh. Like there was like a radius where you were supposed to stay within the radius around your house. And I actually met another skater from the neighborhood, and we had like our daily skate sessions. And he was a school student at the time, like a high school student, and he said he had to actually push back against his parents going out because they were like, "Oh, do you really want to go out? Like it's kind of dangerous right now." And he was like, "I've been sitting in front of the computer all day. Like I'm going nuts. I need to go out and like move and skate." So actually, yeah, my personal experience was like I was actually closer to feeling like there's a skate scene, even though it was just another guy, but like we were having our sessions in lockdown. So I'm curious if you have any accounts on that, how that was.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start in my field and then slowly roll into my personal experience. So first of all, like this year before was a very intense year for me because I went there every week. After this day, I had to write my protocols, and I really grew into this group. And there already we had like encounters outside of the field. I deliberately decided to not include them into my study, but of course I've gotten into contact with participants from the field in other skate parks. They added me on Instagram. I did that I used Instagram also to grow deeper into the field, to follow up on their skating, to have something to talk about in the field, because I've seen that they landed a trick like on the weekend outside. And then, as I said, it abruptly stopped. And for me, at first, it was a shock because I wasn't able to do anything. I could call the teamers and the organizational persons from the skate park, but the study was over all of a sudden, and I had figured out like a plan of how to say goodbye, how to sharp out my my categories, how to conduct further interviews, and that all was from one day to the other more or less over. And I did experience certain members from the field who